Thank you, Nick. Well, a very good day, everyone, wherever your time zone is, and thank you for attending our third webinar in our 2021 webinar series as we discuss the topics of green industry, sustainability, and electric vehicles. I'm Jay Garner with Garner Economics, and I have the honor to serve as the chair of the Guild until June of this year. Today's session will be moderated by our president and CEO, Rick Weddle, and we have two excellent Guild member presenters today. They are Tracy Hyatt Bosman of Biggins Lacey Shapiro and Tom Stringer of BDO. As part of our new business plan that we call Guild Forward, we have a series of new products we kicked off last fall and early this year, both virtual and in person. This webinar series has proven to be particularly popular with our EDO friends, meaning all of you, so thank you for joining us today. Our final webinar is scheduled for May 18 and is titled Economic Development Marketing in a Post-Pandemic World. That webinar will be led by Dee Dee Caldwell of GLS and Jeanette Goldsmith of the Strategic Development Group. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Rick Weddle.
Thank you, Jay, and good afternoon to everyone, and thanks for joining us and taking time from your busy schedule for this important Site Selectors Guild webinar, the third, as Jay noted, in our 2021 series. I'm Rick Weddle, President and CEO of the Site Selectors Guild, and I'm pleased to serve as moderator of this webinar today. As Jay noted, we have a great panel for you today. Tracy Hyatt Bosman with Biggins Lacey Shapiro and Company will lead us off with a presentation focused on positioning for the green economy. Tom Stringer with BDO will take a deep dive in this topic and discuss what it takes to compete and win electric vehicle projects. You're in for a real treat as these experts dig into and unpack positioning for the green economy and renewable energy industry development. Before we get started though, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping details. This Zoom platform gives you the opportunity to ask specific questions to our presenters. Look for the question button at the bottom of your desktop, laptop, or tablet. By clicking on this button or tab, you can type in a specific question and we will do our best to answer it. I'll be reviewing and selecting questions for panelists during the Q&A section. Remember, use the question button or tab, not the chat button, for your webinar topic questions. Additionally, we are recording today's webinar, and so by the end of the week, as a paid subscriber, you will receive an email with a password link to the recording. So now, let's get started, and let me introduce Tracy Hyatt Bosman. Tracy?
Thank you, Rick, and thank you, Jay, and great to see everybody here today. As you've already been told, you're going to hear two very different presentations today. I'm going to share some observations across industries, and then Tom is going to give you a deeper industry-specific presentation and share some case studies. So we hope you will find it to be a very helpful presentation across a very, very broad topic. And then we'll have the opportunity, as Rick said, during the Q&A session to come back to, excuse me, any aspects that we may not have addressed. So I thought I'd start us off with a level set on what do we mean by the green economy. And Nick, if you'll bring up that first slide, great. So the UN defines the green economy, and just bear with me as I read this to you because there's a lot in here. So green economy is defined as low carbon, resource efficient, and socially inclusive. And, you know, I have to admit that before I started preparing for this presentation, I did not really equate the socially inclusive part with green economy. To me, green economy was more about the environment. So that was a bit of an aha for me, but as I researched the different definitions, I did find that to be consistent across the board. So then continuing, in a green economy, growth in employment and income are driven by public and private investment into such economic activities, infrastructure, and assets that allow reduced carbon emissions and pollution, enhanced energy and resource efficiency, and prevention of the loss of biodiversity and ecosystem services. I'd like everybody to have that memorized by the end of this presentation, and that will be one of your big takeaways. But as you can see, I mean, this is a huge topic. So clean energy companies, whether it's electric vehicles like Tom is going to speak to, or new energy vehicles, water technology, LED light bulbs, there's a whole range of companies, and you can see some of the sectors on this wheel, which I stole from the London Stock Exchange. Don't worry, I will return it later. But you'll see that it covers transportation, energy efficiency, like I said, even food and agriculture sneak in here. And the London Stock Exchange is using a metric of saying that these companies that they would consider to fall into this green economy are those that are generating over 50% of their total annual revenues from products and services that contribute to the green economy. So your community's green strategy may look a lot like a traditional target industry, focusing your attraction efforts on these types of companies, be it solar panel manufacturers, wind turbine manufacturers, lithium battery R&D, related supply chains, and the like, and that's okay. Okay, that's even smart. Oh, and by the way, I wanted to just share, even a little different angle. Site Selection Magazine had an article in January about specialized port operations that cater to these companies. So I'm going to just throw the link to that article up in the chat section right now, and you'll see it come in from the other Tracy Hyatt Bosman. That's a technical workaround, so just bear with me on that. Don't read it now, just copy it, copy that link, read it later. Please keep listening to the presentation for now. Okay, so beyond targeting the core green economy companies, though, what has really stood out to me in the past couple of years, and where I want to spend some time today, is how green is permeating companies and projects that aren't in the sectors that are included on this wheel. So more and more companies are weaving green into their business models, and it's blending into the whole concept of ESG measures as well, right? For example, I could argue that the fashion industry is working as hard on sustainability as the solar industry. And I'll just read a couple things or share a couple things with you here. So Nike has an entire line of sustainable products that are featuring recycled materials, right? They're using recycled materials in their manufacturing processes, and they're urging their suppliers to do the same. They have a Nike Grind program, which eliminates waste by collecting post-consumer shoes that have certain non-recyclable materials, and then using those to make other materials such as weight room floors and baseball fields. And then you've got Patagonia. They are dedicating 1% of all sales to ecological grants and organizations. They encourage their customers to buy and sell worn wear. They will repair used clothing so other consumers can wear it. They are looking at water conservation. They're doing everything they can. Their consumers are demanding it. So if you buy something at an Eileen Fisher store, another example, first of all, that you bought a natural fiber, but they also want you to return your clothes when you're done. They want you to bring in your worn out clothes. They'll take them back and then resell them or make them into new designs. It's part of their future without waste vision. And in fact, this concept of circular, nothing's ever really thrown away. It continues to be reused and recycled, is really becoming a baseline for that, not just the fashion industry, but other industries as well. And I'm going to just put up a couple more articles that you can read at your leisure on the circular economy. Couple more examples: pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, Biogen, which is a life science company, states in September 2020, we launched Healthy Climate, Healthy Lives, a $250 million 20-year initiative to eliminate fossil fuels across our operations by 2040. We are the first Fortune 500 company to make such a bold commitment, which goes far beyond net zero. Burt's Bees, you're probably familiar with their products. They are focusing in on natural products. This is a big movement in the cosmetics market, green beauty products, featuring these not only natural ingredients, but renewable raw materials, and looking at how they're making everything. So that green, again, going throughout their entire process and their supply chain. It is true, consumer-facing companies are more likely to be attuned to being green, but we're seeing that go further upstream too in the business-to-business industries. And that's something that I think is newer. And we see it sometimes driven by the requirements of the customer, who is driven by consumer. So in other words, the company that we're working with is not consumer facing, but is not that far removed. But it may also be driven by the company's leadership. And we do see that where they're individually have a personal, they're putting importance on sustainability. And then definitely, especially among the office products, we see that is driven by the company's workforce themselves. And, you know, I want to say that that's particularly for those that have a millennial heavy workforce, but more and more, I feel like it's bigger than just the millennials. So I'm starting not to add that qualifier to it. We have 2 projects right now that are intent on being net carbon zero or better. Both of those are more or less consumer facing. But to illustrate the point that it does go beyond the consumer facing companies, one of our clients makes filtration products for the beverage and pharmaceutical industries. And they have been very focused on energy efficiency. They're giving that a lot of thought. We have another client who makes food additive or nutraceutical type products. Their very site selection decision may come down to which location can best address the disposition of their bio waste. You know, we have to be candid here though, right? I mean, businesses have to make money. If they can't be green and still make the green, but I'm sorry, bad humor. I won't do any more jokes, I promise. They're not going to do it. They have to make money. But when consumers are willing to pay a premium for what they feel is a sustainable business model, like a Patagonia, or when renewable energy is as, if not more cost effective than fossil fuels, or when innovation in energy efficiency means a lower electric spend, that's when green makes good business sense. Sorry, when green makes good business sense and it's good for people and it's good for the environment, then that becomes something more like a movement, right? And that's what we seem to have. So if you're vested in economic development, you're vested in, you need to be at least vested in the green economy, because the distinction between the economy as a whole and the green economy, in our experience, is becoming very blurred. So I want to translate that into some actionable items at the community level. And Nick, you can, yeah, perfect. So utilities are really at the heart of a lot of this, right? What are you doing to encourage and support your electric company, your water company, your sewer company, as they look to become more sustainable in their practices and to find innovative solutions for the companies in your area, the ones that are there now and the ones that may be coming in. Waste streams that you see there in the 3rd bullet point. Rick, you and I were talking about this yesterday and mentioning CO2 as a waste stream that Dee Dee Caldwell, another guild member, had encountered in one of her projects. And we're seeing that too. So companies that are trying to be sustainable have to figure out what to do with their waste. That's the definition of sustainability, right? So they're looking for innovative ways to either dispose of it or find somebody that can use it. And I'm going to throw up a whole bunch of links for you to look at a later time. But these talk about different initiatives in identifying the waste that is coming out of a company, who might be able to use it. There's an interesting note about California having recycling market development zones where they're trying to encourage this type of behavior, and some other articles as well. I do want to note that the articles I'm putting up are really just out of interest. I've not done a full survey of all of these topics such that I can be sure I'm giving you the very best and deepest and current and all these articles, but they should at least give you a sense for it. And I really encourage those of you that are on the call today, if you are involved in something, you have a link to a program or link to an article, link to a metric that plays into some of these topics, please throw that in the chat too. This doesn't need to be, in fact, it shouldn't be a one-way conversation. So, keep going down that list. Gray water options, that's one that we're coming across in a number of our projects now. The technical expertise on ways you can come at your electric requirements in different and non-traditional ways. Transit solutions, and I'm sure some of you are probably thinking that that's only for the big cities. So I'm going to pop up a link to what Wilson, North Carolina is doing in terms of transit. We can go on to the next slide there, Nick. Air quality, LEED cert. LEED's been around for a good bit now, but it hasn't gone away, right? So we still want these sustainable buildings, green roofs where they make sense. Green space, very important. One of the ones I didn't put up here that I realized later is natural habitat. So that's natural habitat areas is a big part of it. Bike lanes, very big, right? Needs to be bikeable. Density, affordable housing, vehicle charging stations. Tom, I think you might be touching on that, but definitely an important one. One of the other things that I did not put on this list, you hate to think about these things at midnight, right? But is training. And training for the green economy is a very important role for economic development groups to play. And if you're not doing workforce yourself, that's okay. What can you do to support your communities? And I just put up some links about some training initiatives there. And if you'll go to the next slide, Nick, I think this is really the most important thing, right? So in short, can you articulate your community's greenness and the vision for sustainability? So you're used to talking about tax incentives, you're used to talking about sites, industry clusters, all of these things, but you have to be able to speak to the greenness as well. And we are seeing sustainability director roles. These are things that have been around for a while in many places, but have become more and more mainstream. And so if you don't have easy answers to this, I would strongly encourage you because we are really seeing this in a lot of projects. And again, not just those that are direct into the green economy. And then you can use the sources here. You can just look them up online to see what some other areas are doing. Wallet Hub has done a lot of research on this and has some metrics that we use sometimes in some of our analysis. These others that you see listed here do as well. I would mention that while we are trying to help clients start to get their arms around green and sustainable type of aspects early in the process, when you still have dozens or more locations in an analysis, it's really hard to do at this point. The data is just not there in a way that we can use and compare. It's not apples to apples in a lot of cases. So where we're really seeing some of this come to bear is when we get to the field work in the shortlisted locations. And that's when we're seeing the green aspects start to take center stage on a lot of the projects. Don't just look for US locations for your benchmarking, especially in terms of green economy, but in general too. Copenhagen has said it wants to be the world's first carbon neutral capital by 2025. Seems to be making good progress there. Less than 2% of the city's waste is going to landfill. Rest is recycled or converted into energy at the center that you're seeing pictured there, which doubles as an artificial ski slope. I don't know about your ski skills, but I'm not making that turn at the bottom, or if I'm supposed to stop there, I'm probably not even able to stop. So not the ski slope for me, but a great example of innovation. And we're seeing it in other cities worldwide too. Lisbon, Singapore, Ljubljana in Slovenia, first European city to commit to a zero waste goal. I think we have some participants today from Canada and the UK. Really encourage you all to tell us what you see, use the chat, and let us know what's going on in your part of the world in response to the green economy. So two major takeaways. Anymore, the green economy is the economy. And I'm sure there's some pushback on that, but as I said, the lines really are blurring in our experience. And you gotta be green to get the green. And with that, Tom, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Thanks, Tracy, I appreciate it. And I will tell everybody, I'll start by saying this, that after the turn of the financial crisis, you started to see shovel-ready jobs come into play. You started to see things like sustainability, LEED certification really start to percolate really to the top of site selection, at least discussions for some time. But truth be told, I was probably one of the skeptics in it because I never thought that it was really driven by market demand. It was more driven by either potential marketing or political concerns. And as projects wore on and the Great Recession receded and we got into a pretty hot economy, those environmental things did start to dissipate pretty significantly as being an important criteria in projects, until one guy came along, and it's specific to EV. And this presentation, this industry, quite frankly, the growth that we've seen, the heat in the market in electric vehicles really owes itself to Elon Musk and his team at Tesla for doing many things from a technology standpoint, from a sustainability standpoint, but most importantly, making electric vehicles, above all else, cool. Because that is the only reason that people buy cars other than to get from point A to B, is because they think they're cool. Whether it's a truck, a car, a vehicle, a 16-year-old, or a senior citizen, we only buy things at that price point because they're cool. And that seems like a really big simplification of this process, but quite frankly, what that did was tap into the ultimate power in the universe, which is consumer demand. And I think it's important to start there because that is what is driving electric vehicles. It's not so much government policy, it's not state tax incentives for purchases. Those still exist in some places, but they've really dissipated largely across the country. What is driving it and what's driving the big three and foreign manufacturers into EV is the consumer demand that Tesla really established. It's quite fun in our profession to be involved in things that are kind of cutting edge and new emerging industries. I'm going to share some things with you in this presentation regarding electric vehicles because our team has directly led two pretty significant projects for manufacturing facilities in the space. We're about to kick off a third, and we're actually starting our first hydrogen-powered aerospace project also this year. So to Tracy's point, the economy is the green economy because consumer demand and market demand is compelling that. And it's not just consumer products, it's in industrial products, and it's up the value chain of components. Nick, if you could advance the slide, that'd be great. So the first project I'll talk a little bit about is a project that came to us about 2016. So before the froth in electric vehicles. And I caution everybody with that term froth, because things were obviously in the electric vehicle space in June, July, August, extremely hot, lots of companies coming to market, very aggressive. All of a sudden, every governor wanted to do an electric vehicle project. Every governor wanted to be the EV governor, but very few states really put in place policies and infrastructure over the last couple of years to be able to capture and to grow that. So when we started this initial project, and this was a hydrogen truck manufacturing company off in 2016, we did the typical automotive. We looked for automotive, we looked for the states that traditionally had the skill sets. And one thing that we learned during the course of this, and it's less true now, but still true, but less true, very few states have the skill sets in their workforce for touch labor to build in the EV space. It's not a criticism of anyone in particular. It's because we just got fat and happy in America and decided not to go into hard applied sciences or to teach people how to work on an assembly line where they could make $150,000 a year. So job training became extremely important as we were conducting this search, and understanding who was going to help us develop the workforce, not one that was sitting around idle. And I like to tell people on the economic development side, the first thing that you'll notice, if you've got a little bit of automotive or you've got a little bit of aerospace, let's try to put those two things together or develop a program around that, and that will help you guys to start to get on this list. So again, 2016, automotive manufacturing. Some states on here might look familiar. You might be from some of those jurisdictions. For labor reasons, for cost reasons, we, as is common in manufacturing, especially now in electric vehicles, staying out of the Northeast and the Midwest. Some folks have made the decision to do that for labor and for union reasons, and that's a separate issue. Our projects were basically startups and well-funded and free to start, basically with a blank slate, if you will. So as we went through this process, which is typical, these things, on a project of this scale, I'm sure many of you have been through them, take 12 to 18 months really from inception to completion, 24 locations, 8 states, but we got down very quickly in the EV space because we realized in a new area, not a lot of folks had the workforce component or the workforce, development pathway in order to start to move forward. And you'll start to see some states here that when we go to my next, and don't switch the slides yet, but when we go to the next slide, that had some similarities. And those tend to be the states that have started to really implement extremely well in EV. And I'm going to say probably the most surprising one for everybody is Arizona. Arizona had no automotive industry and no significant aerospace industry 5 years ago. But they were, take a look at where they are. Location is everything in real estate. And they're in California's doorstep. And California, obviously out of the gate with Fremont and Tesla through no cause of California, but was really putting some pressure, letting Tesla's incentives start to leave. And there was a significant amount of workforce flight to Arizona, which made it an interesting concept. But the most important thing was the Ducey administration said, hey, we're going to welcome you guys here. We're going to get you the permits for autonomous vehicles and alternative fuel testing on day one, and have at it. Use our roadways to go ahead and do that. Tennessee, when Bill Lee came into office, similar types of programs started to come in place, kind of a commitment towards implementation in the EV space. A little bit less so than the other two in South Carolina. They went through a leadership changeover when Haley left to join the Trump administration, but finally started catching up. Again, largely BMW driven, now Volvo driven, and Volvo's commitment to go EV. So those were some of the states that were starting to make interesting policy decisions to start to move the needle as early as 15 and then into 16 and 17, well before the market froth that we saw last summer. If we could advance the slide. Project now that we started in 2018 that really just concluded, late 2018, really just is concluding now. More significant in terms of not an industrial application, but a consumer application. The Arizona market started with Lucid, with Nikola, with Waymo, with Too Simple. Now it's starting to establish itself really as a cluster. Tennessee, at this point in time, has significant experience in attracting all of GM's work, not just, and I mean that from an EV standpoint, not from just a historic. Volkswagen, same opportunity, all of Volkswagen's EV work, a $3 billion retooling, and Nissan as well in the state. So some of the states that had implemented some really specific pro-EV policies around permitting and stand-up and usage of the roads, and then workforce development, start to get significant wins at this point in time. But there were some new players to the mix. Traditionally strong Texas. Texas really gets a look at every mega project in the country, whether it's aerospace, engineering, or automotive or office. Texas kind of went through its transition from Rick Perry to Governor Abbott, and I feel like they started catching back up, and obviously were incredibly successful with attracting Tesla this year and having the support of SpaceX and that legacy of having helped them pull that off. But don't kid yourselves, Tesla was offered a significant fortune from Texas, as they were from the other two states that were competing for that. So what we started to notice is, as states caught on to developing workforce and getting pathways to build the non-existent workforce for EV and start to transition touch labor, incentives became extremely important. Project financials became important. It couldn't be a blank check, because Wall Street and funds that were investing were starting to hold people to task a little bit. We have some established cluster at this point in time, 18 into 19. Good old-fashioned, project infrastructure, site deliverability metrics really rose to the top of this one, but also project financials. So the old-fashioned economic development incentives to help become a differentiator at this point started to overtake what was a given. Now you have a workforce plan. You've got a cluster that's being built in some of these states. So how are we going to play in this space and start to go after it? You also saw Florida come in, similar kind of thing, but with more of a focus, quite frankly, on the aerospace angle. Florida with KSC and the Space Coast, very long aerospace history. It's really only one of 3 areas in the country that significant aerospace, projects can consider. But it tacked towards hydrogen energy, hydrogen-powered flight, electric-powered flight. It's won some small projects pretty successfully, again, on that KSC side, but focusing on targeted incentives for that particular industry, because they have the workforce, and that's a given for folks who are looking at it. If you just advance the slide. Just some general things. We wrote a quick summary from Project B. This is the electric vehicle project, and we thought that this was kind of helpful in terms of some of the things that really stood out to decision makers. Everybody does 50 or 100 variables, but we went back and took a look at the project and what really kind of helped drive the process on this. And everybody says labor is the most important factor, and it is a critical factor. There's no question about it. But in a spot like EV, where the workforce is being invented, the most important work characteristic that we needed were mechanical engineers, and the place that ended up winning was the place with the lowest concentration of them, because they had really defined the pathway to build touch labor and bring engineering talent in over a longer period of time. And this is going to be even more pressure in Phoenix now for the EV space, given what they've just done with Intel and TSMC and all the chip fab facilities that have located there. So for those locations that are sitting out there saying, well, I don't have a workforce for this, I don't know if I can get there. If you can develop a pathway and you can make your financial metrics work, or your other infrastructure work, and your site availability work, you can certainly get there and create a cluster, which is really what, quite frankly, Phoenix did in less than 5 years. I'd point out another place that's on the list, and I don't know if there are folks in Colorado here that I think are this was pretty interesting. Colorado reached out to us when we concluded one project and said, put us on your list. We have no industry. We're going to admit our faults, but this is a policy decision that we'd like to get around. And if you're doing another EV project, we really want to be considered. And they fell off early on, but I was actually really impressed with the pathway that they put forward to kind of make up for the faults that they have over a period of time. And I'm convinced that despite some of the shipping costs from a manufacturing standpoint, logistics costs to get in there, they're going to be a location that probably gets to be a player in it because they have political buy-in, they have consumer buy-in. A lot of EVs are sold in Colorado, and they'll probably pick up some attendant services, charging stations, manufacture of certain components like batteries. So interesting way to play the space. If you could advance the slide. Just, I'll leave it here with these two. In Orlando, again, we looked at them. They also reached out. They wanted to be a part of this, but they were really, as we started going on, their focus was on a bigger hydrogen infrastructure for aerospace, which we found interesting and really sets them up, I think, pretty well going forward. And Raleigh was a place that we considered and actually wanted to look at this because they hit a lot of the metrics. And they didn't have a whole lot of interest in a couple of these EV projects. And I guess based on yesterday's news, with what they were working on for the last 2 years, it makes a whole lot of sense to us now. So just if EV is not right for you, I would say there's certainly some other things that are out there. But I would kind of leave you with this from the EV space and our experience on it. Like a lot of other things, whether it's biotech, nanotech, there's always a flavor of the moment in economic development that everybody wants to be. And if you're going to try to build a cluster, you can. This is a unique space, but I would caution everybody in this instance. There's going to be a significant culling of the herd in electric vehicles, exactly as it was 100+ years ago in regular automotive. So you want to pick and choose the EV projects that you work for, make pretty wisely. Make sure that they're funded, make sure they have significant backup, and make sure you believe in the technology, that it has a consumer element. Because if you do that, those are going to be the folks who make it and go forward. And with that, I'll turn it back to Rick.
Well, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tracy. Boy, I feel like I've been drinking from a fire hydrant here on green energy and electric vehicles. A lot of content, a lot of information. Let's just jump right into the Q&A in the time we have left. Tracy, you set the stage for the perspective on the green industry, the renewable industry and stuff. Is it now settled policy from a overall business and government point of view? I mean, is it here to stay?
I think it's definitely here to stay. You heard some of the, back and forth that we've seen over time in some of these sectors. Clean energy really took off, I don't know, what was it, 10, 12 years ago, with a lot of the federal renewable energy incentives, and that drove a lot of the activity. But what we're seeing now is that, as Tom was pointing out, I mean, the economics have to be there, right? And the economics for clean energy in particular are getting there, or are there in some cases. And so that just establishes this as something that we're going to see settled, as you say. I'd say some of the more sustainable things or the other sustainable aspects are maybe not quite as developed as the clean energy piece of it. But the consumers, again, to what Tom and I both said, are driving that bus, driving that electric bus, right? So, I think for a large part it is settled, though different companies and different industries are at different points along the spectrum.
Let's see if we can take the other side of that, just because even after something becomes settled policy and is the current trend, or Tom, as I said, flavor of the month moving forward in that, I want to go to Jay Garner here for a question. Just, I mean, there's still traditional projects that are going about business the way they have always gone about it. Is that right, Jay?
Oh, sure. And I think the question, there's really two questions there. What's the definition of sustainability? And what's the definition of green? Okay, so as it relates to sustainability, which has really been around for a long time, no one could really define it. And there was a lot of opinion and back and forth on what does it really mean. The definition on green economy that Tracy brought up from the UN, included that component of, I guess, social inclusion. They needed to footnote that. what does that exactly mean? So the US Chamber has a definition of sustainability, which is sustainability in the circular economy. It has a more micro approach in that discussion, that definition. Now, that was defined years ago before many corporations became political activists. And now that you're seeing more activism from corporations, who knows where all that's going to fall out as it relates to it. But I'll say this. So we play in the space of the food and beverage sector a lot. They've been engaged in sustainability practices for years because it's all about the economics. And so the byproducts of, say, protein facilities, rendering facilities, would always be sold to farmers or to other entities that may create a food product as a result of renderings. Yuck. But that was what they did, because it was a matter of economics. As it relates to some of the traditional manufacturing, we're working an automotive parts manufacturing project right now. And, like most consultants, you go through this process where you're capturing the information from the client of what's important to them. And we call that musts and wants. And in the scoring matrix, we have a discussion about sustainability. And they ranked it very low. So it falls into the want category instead of a must. On a scale of 1 to 10, they ranked it at 2. So the typical economic development response is it depends. And it just depends on the project, especially if it's a business to business project.
Thank you, Jay, for that counterpoint. Tom, I want to jump now into the weeds if we can. Let's move out of the clouds and the 30,000 foot level and get into the weeds. We have a couple of really good questions from our audience. One is a question about, let's just say you mentioned the Midwest, and this is a question specifically about Illinois. And they're saying, is it off the table because of labor, taxation, regulation issues? And then a follow-on question behind that is, because you mentioned Texas a lot, how did the power outages affect Texas' competitive position overall? So that's a twofer for you right there.
Yeah, I'll start with the Texas one first, and I'll say not a bit. Not a bit, right? These projects take place over periods of months, if not years, in terms of the due diligence and what goes into it. Every location in the country, every location has a risk. We do all my colleagues, we all do risk assessments. And those could be everything from earthquakes to power to fires to natural disasters. It's everybody gets them in some way, shape, or form, and it's how you recover from them. So that goes into the analysis, but it's one factor, and it's not a showstopper. Is it something that got news, gives everybody pause, take a look at it? Sure, you bet. So are the hurricanes. That hasn't stopped Texas's growth. The power issue won't. It'll be dealt with and addressed. Already is. And a lot of sunlight on these things, cleans up political messes. I'm a big believer in that. So it hasn't affected it at all. In terms of the Midwest, Illinois, I'm going to put New York, New Jersey, and California into that. There are structural problems in the country that have nothing to do with politics. They're simply based on economics and how you run states. And Republican or Democrat, it doesn't matter. You can't run states poorly and not have the business community, especially startups that are really, I will tell you, reliant on investor money and hedge fund money and PE money, and you can't make an argument to put them in the Midwest or New York or California and think that it's in any way, shape, or form going to be cost effective. It's not. You're not going to get people, engineers, to want to relocate to those places because the cost of living is too high. Those people are already, migrating to lower cost, warmer, lower tax jurisdictions, and that's a big economic development issue for people in the old line, as I call them, in-house in the old line manufacturing states. It's a big problem. So there's going to have to be some policy changes in those states in order to start to attract and win those projects, because the one or two that they have gotten have not been successful. Now that's for a variety of reasons, but they've not been successful. And I think we're less than 5 years away from the Fremont factory for Tesla being closed. Once Austin is stood up to do the Cybertruck, you're going to see that factory close.
If this were the evening news, I would say, and you heard it here. We just made news. But I mean, real quickly,
Rick.
Tom, you said policy changes to help those areas of the country. Any one of you, for the whole panel, what could one of those more developed markets do now to shift their dynamics?
I'll tell you what I would do. We were having this debate internally. If I'm New York, California, Illinois, I eliminate entirely all my incentives in my economic development programs. And I lay those departments of people off. Tough question. Guess what? Nothing you've done in the last 20 years has worked. That's the truth. Your programs are cumbersome. They're politically toxic in a state like New Jersey or a state like Illinois. California just doesn't even know how to implement them. And I try to find a way to reduce the personal income tax rate, because people are using their feet right now, and we're seeing that in recruitment. You're seeing it on the political side. We had the census data come out yesterday. Personal decisions for individuals are becoming personnel decisions for companies.
Interesting. Anyone else want to take a cut at that? Tracy?
Well, yeah, not to pull you off. A couple things, just to the point of the most recent question on policy, and I think that in my mind, I wouldn't take the incentives out. That wouldn't be my approach. But where I'd focus the attention would be on getting the budget in order in these states and providing a path forward. So based in Chicago, I know as an example, we constantly talk about if the companies knew what to expect, if they knew that there was an answer and what the tax, burden was going to look like on a go forward basis, that would go a long way. And if the government talks the talk of being business friendly. But Rick, if I could, I also just wanted to touch back on Mike's question about the green energy sector in Illinois, and just note that, and this doesn't take away from Tom's comments, but specifically to green energy, a lot of that growth that we've seen in the past with the wind, with the solar, a lot of that has been legislatively induced, right, by having clean energy targets in each of the states. And Illinois is kind of in a gap at the moment as to what those plans are. And so that stalls that out. That said, Illinois does have, does generate a lot of wind, and biomass is a big sector. To some extent, where Illinois gets hurt is because its electric rates are not awful. They're kind of middle of the pack, whereas when you see the Northeast, as an example, or other parts of the country where the electric rates were higher, there was more incentive to really go after those sectors. And they've made a lot of progress. The Southeast, on the other hand, hasn't had that because they had very low power rates. And so they haven't had to put those green renewable energy targets in place. But at the end of the day, the energy sector, while you can export energy, it's also supplying the people in that state, right? And in those communities. And to that extent, the communities in the states can make their own decisions and drive their own destiny.
Interesting. Tracy, let me follow up back with you again. You made a comment about being able to articulate your greenness. I thought that was an interesting comment, because that's how you merchandise, get noticed, and be on the short list. But you also mentioned the diversity, inclusion, the social issues in the UN definition. Is that different for office and manufacturing? I mean, is there a difference here in greenness for an office or a manufacturing project that we ought to pay attention to?
Yeah, I think you could put the consumer-facing manufacturing, and I came up with some examples, right, or shared some examples. That's Nike, the North Face, Patagonia, those types of companies. If you put those with the office, right, I think those are the ones that are most attuned to these questions of social equity and diversity and looking inward at themselves to see who they're hiring and who they're promoting. And I do think you see a difference there versus your business to business manufacturing.
Interesting. Let's slice that another. Anyone else want to take a comment? Tom, do you see that also with office and manufacturing difference?
Well, I thought it was easier a few years ago. The only question really was, hey, are we in a lead office or not? That was really getting me kind of the attention. And when people started to get to the expense of it, it became, well, we could be bronze, or silver. We don't need to go all the way. Again, market demand now, and folks wanting to make sure on the value chain side. And I'm going to leave office aside until we start to see big office projects again. But on the manufacturing side, definitely. People want to see the inputs be green. People want to see the footprint of the facility be green. If the ultimate product's green, they sure want the energy going into the facility to be green. So it's definitely, again, it's a huge factor from a deliverability standpoint and a supply chain standpoint in manufacturing.
So it sounds also like you're suggesting if the market demand or if the coolness or whatever it is that's driving that is sufficient, it begins to offset some of the cost issues. Maybe not completely, but a little bit. What about urban versus rural? Is there, because many of our partners, our EDOs, are smaller communities. What's a small community to do in this greenness world?
Well, I mean, go ahead, Tracy.
No, you go, Tom.
Sure. I would just say people have been wondering how do we solve the urban rural divide for, the last half decade. It's been a really big issue. My God, and no one foresaw this. What a perfect opportunity through the use of exactly what we're doing today from a technology standpoint. This is a huge economic development opportunity for the suburbs and rural communities in America. I think as we look at office projects and as we're starting to see, and the 5 families of crime or the New York City landlords are going to have a different say about this, but people are not going to send everybody back to the office because it's too efficient, too effective, and too cost efficient to keep the biggest cost other than people on the balance sheet at 1/3 to 1/2 of what it previously was. So I go back to what I said earlier, personal decisions are becoming personnel decisions. So companies are going to go to where people are. I'd focus, quite frankly, on recruiting people and talent, whether they're engineers, whether they're in particular industries and clusters that you may want to build around. I'd recruit the people and get them to live, because odds are they can start. They're going to be working anywhere they want come September, when this thing is really starting to wrap up. If I'm a commercial real estate guy, I'd be very worried.
Tracy, I saw you nod your head when you said people. Do you buy that? Recruit people?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's especially in key skill sets, especially to rural areas. I've been thinking lately, maybe particularly to areas that don't rank highly on diversity, to try to improve that aspect of their metrics. But the rural areas are not exempt from having to play in the green economy. They're clearly not going to have the density. They're not going to have some of the same questions being asked of them. But the transit link that I shared, that was for Wilson, North Carolina, a small community, and they're looking at it. And certainly from the manufacturer standpoint, if they're looking for clean energy, they're looking for it whether they're in an urban or a rural area.
We saw the news yesterday on the census and the lowest population growth since the 30s. I've just got to, and we were talking about attracting people, and the fact that we've pretty much not been attracting immigrants lately. Does that play into this at all? I mean, our population growth, anyone want to take a cut at that one in the time we have left?
Yeah, I'm happy to weigh in a little bit on this. So I've been in this realm now for 41 years. When I first got into the business in 1980, the average age in the United States was 35. It is now 38.2. In Japan, and I started going over to Japan a lot in 1985, the average age was 41. It's now 48. So, you know, the aging of the workforce is significant, which is what's causing automation. Obviously, when you look at how the congressional map is going to change as a result of population shifts, it goes back to Tom's earlier point on policy. Policy matters. And the outmigration in business unfriendly states, personal income tax unfriendly states is significant. So I think anytime we're looking at a community and we see a population loss, especially if it's sustained over a 10-year period, that's a huge red flag for us.
Yeah, I guess we saw with, not to pick on California, but with the census report yesterday, first time actually that the people leaving California is documented. I mean, really, in terms of the loss of a congressional seat.
Well, so here's the other thing with it. It was fascinating. We do a lot of work in Texas. I was in Texas last month. I'm going back tomorrow, but I went by the new Tesla facility in South Travis County. 34 cranes at that facility. One of the largest footprints of any buildings. That building is designed with the curvature of the earth. It's that big. So the outmigration from California to other places like Arizona, Utah, Texas is real. And yet I'm reading where the head of development for the state of California says it could be somewhat exaggerated. And so they're coming to grips with reality.
Yeah.
If you're going to want to fix the issue, it's almost like being an alcoholic. You have to accept the fact that you have a problem before you can fix it.
Yeah, and Jay's exactly right on that point. I mean, we had we have a dynamic duo of mayor and governor here. For those of you who don't know, I'm a New York boy, but they're both doing this as they usually do, pointing fingers at each other for the loss of another congressional seat and saying, well, the state didn't do good enough job counting people. The city didn't do good enough job. We have them. That's non-recognition of the problems that are existing. These policies matter, and we're going through another great migration within this country right now. One thing the pandemic actually did, again, pick a side. It's fine. I'm not saying not to. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing. But one thing the pandemic did, it allowed regular folks to get at home and understand basic supply and demand economic issues, good government, good policy issues. I still stand in bread lines to get Italian bread on the weekends. I mean, it's unbelievable up here. So think of toilet paper times 1,000, and that's what it's been in my area of New York for the better part of a year. It's hard to articulate that in really dense economic terms, but for the last year, everybody has seen it. And people have decided to pick up and start voting with their feet more aggressively than they've had in the past, and it's more apparent. And then look at what some of these states have done. We here in New York have just doubled down on taxes. And taxes are necessary for civilized society, but everything in balance and moderation, to Tracy's point earlier. So you're going to see this exacerbated and this movement exacerbated. And if you live in a smaller community, rural community, this is really a chance to flip the switch. The big cities are going to find their way just based on volume. But the suburbs, the other areas that are in the Northeast, or the other California cities, the attendant suburbs, boy, everyone there is up for grabs, and they're going to move somewhere because most folks aren't going to stay.
You know, we could take this conversation all the way through noon tomorrow, I think, because we're really on a roll right now, but that's really all the time we have. I want to thank Tom. I want to thank you, Tracy. I want to thank you, Jay. I want to thank you for what a rich and robust conversation around the green industry and the kind of evolving circumstances surrounding that. I'm going to pause and kick it back to you, Jay, to close us out.
All right, thank you, Rick, and I'll be very brief. I want to thank again our panelists. I really learned a lot. Tracy, Tom, thank you for your participation. Every time I am able to serve as the host of one of these. I learned so much from the panelists, and I sure did learn a lot from you. I know that our attendees did the same. I want to just thank all of you for participating and remind you again that we have one more webinar in the latter part of May. So be part of that if you can. It is on economic development marketing. And one last plug on behalf of the Guild. We have our annual conference back in person, June 10th through 12th in Orlando. We are sold out. However, we still are taking wait list registrants. So contact the Angela Rogers Group if you would like to be on that wait list. They work very diligently to try to get people in as we get cancellations or shifts. So thank you all so very, very much for your participation today, and good hunting out there as you continue to grow your communities. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.